I do want to talk about something that I think is important to all of us. And I think it's something that kind of changes the way that we view a lot of things. And that is attitude, right? So some of us have good attitudes. Some of us have bad attitudes, for lack of a better word, right? So, Audrey, she works at school. She's a teacher. Ceci, you're going to be a teacher eventually or no? Possibly, right? Okay. So, and of course, you guys all interact with other, friends and buddies in your school. So you see the kinds of attitudes that are going on in your everyday life, right? Some of us in here, I don't know, I don't want to call out anybody, but maybe some of you guys might think that maybe you don't have a really good attitude, right? Or maybe your teachers have told you, well, you just don't have a good attitude about whatever, right? So, but I want us to see a little bit of that from the perspective of the Bible, of what God says. And a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about, it's not really like something that explicit, like, okay, the Bible says you need to do it this way. A lot of it is just my own personal commentary. But I do have some scriptures here that I found, some things that could be useful to you guys. But it's important because the way that we come across to other people, right, says a lot about ourselves, right? And I have a lot of kids in my school who I can honestly say, when I look at them, when I interact with them, I'm like, either they're just intrinsically on their own, just very well behaved. They have a very good attitude about everything. You tell them to do something, they'll do it. They're the kind of person that says, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, thank you, excuse me, that kind of thing. So that tells me either they just kind of on their own figured out that that's the right thing to do, or maybe somewhere along the line, they learned it either from their parents or from their families or their guardians, or maybe being involved in some type of a group. When I was growing up, of course, my parents were, very good parents to me, and I'm the youngest one in the crowd. So, I'm kind of babied, right? Chiflado is what we say, right? He's the baby of the family. Oh, mom, dad, you let Mario get away with everything because he's the smallest of the whole clan. And when we were growing up, you never took us here, you never gave us this, and we never did this. And then you get it from your brothers and sisters that are older. Well, when we were growing up, we went up north and we worked on the fields and we had a slave to buy our shoes or whatever, right? So I know, because I've heard it and I lived it, right? Because that's, anybody here the youngest in the family? Okay, all right. So maybe you've experienced that. Who knows, maybe not. But I know that I certainly did. And so the way that we come across, like these students that come across to me, says a lot about themselves, says a lot about their family, says a lot about their environment. And it's not always the environment or the family's fault. A lot of times it's just the kid, right? A lot of times it's just the person. I mean, that's their personality. Maybe they have a different type of personality. Maybe they're not trying to be mean or whatever, but they just have a very outgoing type of person, very charismatic, But anyway, let's kind of look at some of the things that I think will help us as far as our attitude. Number one, loving God must have first priority in our thinking, right? So I think that that's where we need to start, is how we love God. If we love God, I think that has to have number one priority in the way that we think about our surroundings. Why? Because if you think about loving God, then you're going to think about all that He stands for. Right? You're going to think about all that He desires from us. You're going to think about all that He expects from us, right? And, it's like your parents, right? If you really dearly love your parents and you really appreciate what you've done, a lot of times the things that you don't do are because you have in mind that it could affect your family, it could affect your parents, it could affect your dad, it could affect your mom. In my case, like I said earlier, a lot of the things that I'm going to say are personal experiences that I've had when I was in college. A lot of the things that I didn't do, and I'm not saying that I was perfect, that I was a little angel, because then I'd be lying, and I'm a Christian, you're not supposed to lie, right? But I know that a lot of the things that I didn't do in college, when I was out on my own with nobody looking after me, with nobody like waiting for me at the door, where were you, or questioning the things that I did. A lot of things that I didn't do in college are because of that, because I loved my parents, because I loved my mom, because I loved my dad, because I loved my family. And I didn't want, in a certain way, I didn't want to disappoint them, right? I saw how my mom struggled in making ends meet. I saw how my dad had to work a lot in the store, day in and day out. He had to get up really early in the morning, and he had to be there till 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. I saw how my mom for many years worked in the school district, not as a teacher, not as a principal, not as a counselor, but as a custodian, right? And so I saw how she had to labor, and whenever I got out of my class, I would always see her standing on the outside with a big one of those big old long brooms, just kind of waiting for the halls to clear out, and she would start brooming away, and she would pick up the chairs, and she would, so I saw the things that she had to go through so that I would be able to go to college, right? And so that I would be able to enjoy the things and have the luxury of going and studying to be somebody that I wanted to be, right? And so some of the things that I didn't do that my friends were possibly doing, I didn't do them, not because I felt like I was almighty and I was better and because I grew up in a Christian home. I mean, yeah, a lot of those things had a significant impact in my life, but a lot of it was because of the family, and I didn't want to disappoint. Right. And so I think that that's the same thing with our attitude, with the way that we see things and the way that we react to things, is because of us loving God, having the foundational and the most priority in our life. In Matthew 22:37 says, Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, right? With your heart, right? With your soul, and with all of your mind. And so I think that that's where our attitude probably has the biggest foundation and the biggest impact, is loving God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. And so I think that if we start there, I think that our attitudes, and many of our attitudes, are going to get adjusted. And I'm not saying that all of you have bad attitudes. I'm not even saying that any of you have bad attitudes. I'm just saying that if we do, then if we want to adjust our attitudes, the way that we react to things, 'cause that's really what an attitude is a reaction to something that's happening to you, or a reaction that you're going through. And so therefore you're expressing it in a physical manner, in a verbal manner, in a way that other people can see what is really truly inside of you, right? And what is truly inside of us is what's in our heart, right? What we hold dear to us, the things that are important to us. So if we want to have any type of change in our attitude, it has to start with loving God with all of our heart, right? The things that really matter to us, the things that we really value. And I'm not saying that it's easy. It's never been easy. I mean, it's a lie for us to say, well, it's really easy, because it's not, right? Because a lot of us are going through, we're all in different stages. Some of us are really early on in our teenage years. Some of us are already young adults, right? And so it's not easy. It's probably easier as you get older, because you start maturing. You've already gone through that stage. And for some of us that are a little bit older, it might be easier to adjust our attitudes and not have those kinds of attitudes. But some of us that are growing up, like many of you are, you're going through a lot of adjustments. You're going through that transition of, well, you relied a lot on your parents, on mostly your parents, and they told you everything that you needed to do. Now you're going into that transition where now you're given a lot more responsibilities. Now you're making your own decisions. Now the decisions that you make are literally impacting your future and your outcome. So, but it always starts with loving God with all of your heart. So if there's anybody here who's struggling with that, well, it's probably an issue with how we view and how we love God. So it starts there, not only with our heart, but with our soul, right? With our whole being. And with our mind as well. Right? Obviously, a lot of the things that I'm saying, you're understanding because of what? Because of your mind. Because you have a functioning mind. You have a mind that works. You can think rationally, right? You can think logically through what I'm saying. So you need to also love God with all of your mind, with your ideas, right? And so that's where we need to start. Deuteronomy 10:12 says, and now, O Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul, right? And so when we view the Old Testament, and what the Old Testament is telling us in this particular portion is basically the same thing, right? Many times when we talk about the word fear, sometimes, yeah, it could mean that you need to be afraid, but many times that's not necessarily a bad thing. right? So I'm afraid of heights because I don't want to, splatter myself all over the floor. So therefore, I'm afraid of getting up on top of the roof. Is that saying anything bad about the roof itself? No, it's more of a mechanism for my protection, right? So when we fear the Lord, we fear the outcome of what could happen if we are disobedient, right? We fear the fact that things could go wrong because the Lord actually told us to do it a different way, but we wanted to do it our own way. So therefore, we ended up, either damaging ourselves or causing damage to ourselves or the people around us. Same thing with gravity, right? I mean, I fear, falling off of the, roof of the house. It's nothing wrong with gravity itself. It's the fact that I don't want to see what the outcome of that is, right? Because it's really hard. It's a lot harder to fall from the top of the roof of the house than it is to have a slip here. Even when you slip here, it could be dangerous. You slip and you hit your head, you could have what is that called? A concussion, right? It was an unfortunate incident that happened not too long ago, actually about a year and probably a month ago. I know that I've shared with you all one of my favorite ministries, and the ministry that I really appreciate and like because I've learned a lot from it. It's called Stand to Reason, right? str.org. Well, they had a lady that worked with them for many, many years. And unfortunately, during the Christmas season, and I hope I don't get the story wrong, but it's kind of along these lines, she was getting some things, putting some things together for Christmas, getting some decorations down and so on and so forth in the garage. Well, if something is up high, what do most of us do? You grab a ladder, right? You get on the ladder and you get the stuff very carefully, and you have to be careful because a lot of times those things will fall. And most of the times you want somebody else there with you to kind of hold it, right? Unless you know it's a very secure ladder, then, right? But what ended up happening was that this lady got up, and very knowledgeable lady, she was probably one of the ones that went hand in hand with Greg Kokel when they started, and she was Greg Kokel's second hand. Well, she ended up slipping, and she fell to the floor. She ended up hitting her head, and she went in a coma. Her brain was swollen. They had to do all kinds of procedures. By God's grace, she's still alive, and she's now recuperating. She's now communicating but this is after a year and months, right? So was it that the ladder was evil? No. Was it that gravity is bad? No, it's just things happen, right? Accidents happen, those things. So we have to be very cautious. So same thing with what the Bible is telling us. Yeah, we need to fear the Lord, but it's not one of those like, I need to be scared. I can't get close to God. I can't talk to God. But it's more because of the things that can happen to us. To walk in all his ways, right? So God would rather us walk in his ways so that we, we'll have a prosperous life and God will bless us in everything that we do. Not that everything will be perfect, but at least, we are going to be doing God's will in our life. And to love him, right? And we just talked about this. And to serve the Lord with all of your heart and with all of your soul. So this Bible verse is saying exactly what the New Testament was telling us. To love the Lord our God with all of our heart and with all of our soul. So that's where we need to start, okay? The second thing, and I'll finish with this. We must maintain an eternal perspective in our thinking. We're so used to thinking, well, what is the gratification going to be now? What am I going to get out of it right now? And a lot of times we react. Why? Because we feel vulnerable at the moment. How many of us have said something at the moment because maybe you were upset? Maybe your attitude was not the best attitude, right? How many of you have said something and then after just a few minutes, after an hour, after sleeping over it, you wake up and you feel bad because you're like, man, I shouldn't have reacted that way. I shouldn't have said that. I feel bad for what I said. Why? Because maybe at the moment it was gratifying for you to say it. But sometimes it takes a lot of restraint in our own lives, in our own attitude to be able to say, maybe I shouldn't say that right now. So we must maintain an eternal perspective in our thinking. In other words, we got to see what and how it will impact our future, and know that there are things that are extremely more important than just what is happening to us right now. Colossians 3:2 says, set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. So, this is funny. I don't know if it's because I'm getting older, but I've encountered this a lot more with, especially here where we live, where people are so anxious to get to places. You're barely moving or you're going a little slower, then honk at you like, okay, well, you're in a hurry. I understand that, right? But you see accidents happening all the time. I saw an accident just yesterday going to where I was supposed to be at. And as I was, it was a lot of cars in the expressway. So I got down and went through the access lane or whatever. And there was just a car who just, man, he was going really fast. I mean, he just saw that there was an accident. He was going so fast. He almost caused another accident, right? So set your minds on the things above, not on earthly things. And why did I say that? Because a lot of times we're just in such a rush to go somewhere, and we're not really thinking about what the eternal perspective is or what the long-term outcome could be. And sometimes we end up damaging relationships, and that all comes down to attitude, right? What is our attitude? We end up damaging relationships because we're just in such a rush to satisfy ourselves. We're just in such a rush to get somewhere that we don't really enjoy the process. We're not enjoying the walk. We're not enjoying what we're doing. We don't see the things that are happening around us. And by the time you know it, we lose people, right? We're like, oh, this person is no longer here. This person is gone. They either left or even worse, they've departed from this world. They've died. And so those are the things that I think really matter, is to just look at what the outcome is going to be in the future, right? So for 2 Corinthians 4:18 says, so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, right? What you see around you, the things that affect the way that you respond to things, those are just temporary. But what is unseen is eternal. And it happens to all of us all the time. Or maybe it's just me, where I think that it's important for me to say something to somebody at the moment, and it might not be the best thing, right? It's like when you go shopping, what's the first thing they tell you when you go to the grocery store? Do you guys know? This is like the best advice that anybody gives you when you go to the grocery store. Don't go shopping for groceries when you're hungry, because then you're going to start putting everything in there. Oh, I'm so hungry, I'll put that one there. I'm so hungry, put that there. Don't go to the grocery store when you're hungry, right? And it's the same thing here. Sometimes we have to look back at our attitude and say, okay, is this the most important thing that I need to do right now? Is this how I need to react towards this particular situation? Is this, because you're younger, is this the way that I really need to talk to my parents? Is this the way that I really need to disobey my parents? Is this the way that I really need to go against what is probably best for me? I just don't see it now. Okay? So number one, we must love God with all of our heart, soul, and mind, right? And that needs to be our priority, right? Not only that, but we need to think about what is really important in our life and how that's going to impact. And we all know that eventually we're all going to die, right? Everything in here is going to pretty much, from our perspective, it's going to be gone. I mean, there's going to be people still here that are going to continue to live on, unless, we can talk about the end of time and all that. It's a different lesson. But for most of us, we're probably going to end up dying sooner than later, right? We only are going to live so long. But, compared to the age of the earth, or compared to when God created the universe, or compared to eternity, how long we're going to be alive, this is just a blink of an eye, man. Things go by so fast, right? And so those are the two things I think are important. I have a whole lot of other things that we can talk about, but I think that for now, those are really important. And I want you to think about those this week. Number one is your attitude and how loving God has an impact on your attitude. And number two, how maybe we need to think about the future. Maybe we need to think about the fact that a lot of things that are happening to us are temporary. And is it really worth the grief? Is it really worth the division that might cause in the family or with your friends? Is it really worth it? Is it really worth putting your parents or your loved ones through something that probably could have been avoided simply if you would have chosen a different route? And most of us know that there's a different route, but we choose not to do it. Most of us know that this is the right thing to do, but because we want to get at somebody or we just want to do our own thing, we decide to do something else. Right? And I think all of those things will honor God and will please God in the long run. And most importantly, I think that it's going to help us grow as a youth. Does that make sense? Okay. Anybody have any questions or anything they want to add before we move on? No? Okay.